Welcome, everyone, to the Services Ops Podcast presented by Provis, the best podcast dedicated to everything people, process, and technology for services organizations. My name is Chris Souza, head of marketing at Provis, and here, as always, is our co-host, co-founder, and CEO of Provis, Mahesh Bakshi. Mahesh, good day.
Good day, and another exciting episode. I'm super excited about our guest today, Frank. He's a CPQ veteran. I don't want to steal thunder from rest of the introduction, but super excited to have you, Frank, with us today.
Very nice of you to invite me, so I'm glad to be here and look forward to see what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah. This is an exciting episode. It's something that's very, very close to Provis, right? CPQ, Provis is Services CPQ. So we understand this audience very well. And CPQ is a very important step in the lead to cash journey for every services organization, right? And Frank is one of the unparalleled experts in CPQ for organizations in general. So let's go ahead and introduce Frank, right? He is president and CEO of Novus CPQ Consulting. Frank and Novus CPQ Consulting has been helping organizations implement and optimize CPQ solutions since 1996. Right. Frank is also a prolific thought leader. You can find him on the CPQ Podcast, who's celebrated over 300 episodes so far and still going strong, where they interview different CPQ leaders every week. Is that right, Frank?
That's right. Yes.
The CPQ Podcast. Love it. All right, Frank. Well, let's go ahead and just jump in really quick. You have great experience in the CPQ space. Let's hear a little bit about your background and what you do at Novus Consulting.
Yep. So I started working in CPQ by accident, as most people did probably, right? So that was in 96. I was the development lead, and I was working on a project to develop an industry solution for special machine manufacturing. And they didn't find anyone who was stupid enough to start working on the configurator, so they assigned it to me. I really loved it, gave me an opportunity to get out of the office and really go into the plant and see how these machines were built, were machines to build semiconductors, right? So I loved it, stayed with it ever since, have done that from the business side, from the IT side, was doing that for small companies, large companies, for consulting companies, now in a research analyst position, and also as a customer, right? So really love the topics. I regularly meet with around 35 vendors, I would say, probably around 20 system integrators, including all the large ones, and obviously tons of customers as well. On top of that, I try to stay in contact with as many universities as possible to see what they do regarding this topic in universities. I'm excited to be here today and talk a little bit more about CPQ and your special version of CPQ with the services CPQ.
Fantastic. So let's go into sort of the transformational aspect of CPQ. And so for part of our audience, and we'll get into the differences a little bit later on what services CPQ means and what product CPQ means. But our audience is feeling a need for change. And it's a complex area of the business to touch, and it can be intimidating. But at some point in time, audiences need to take that leap and be bold and take a leap towards CPQ or services CPQ, whatever it's going to be. How, when you're engaging with companies, clients, organizations, how do you help them evaluate their needs and make sure that they're going in the right direction when it comes to technology and CPQ?
I think the process is still fairly simple if you think about it. You have to know a lot to evaluate it, but the process itself is pretty straightforward. I mean, I'm also working with a customer right now. What we do first is obviously reviewing the business requirements that they have gathered so far to see if there are any gaps in there. We also look at the processes that are impacted, because even though everyone talks about CPQ, it's like, what exactly do you mean here? Is the configuring and the pricing, is that only for quoting, or you do that also for orders? And how does it change it? You use it for your own sales team, you use it for the channel partners who sell your products or services, and how about online and stuff like that, right? So I think, gather business requirements, gather business processes, then you evaluate these requirements. They also need to be prioritized, by the way, right? So very important. So what's really important, I see often customers have 1,500 requirements, everything is super important, that doesn't work. Also, 5 requirements and nothing is really super important, but everything needs to be implemented, also not helpful. So even though it sounds very simple, it takes a little bit of time, potentially guidance to get there. Then I think what we do based on the requirements that you gather, you find a list of vendors who fit these requirements. Now you have to keep in mind you have well over 100 different vendors. Everyone says it's a CPQ solution, but they are not all for the same industries. They are not all for the same customer size. They are not all for the same budget, and so on. So you have to know the area a little bit in order to see who do you want to engage with. Then the next step we do is we really start with the selection process. I always do this in 2 steps. As to say, I first want to send the questionnaire to the vendors to have them answer, to see also how much their interest is. If a vendor is really interested, they will answer it. If someone is less interested or super busy, they may just scan over it, or you don't get an answer, or you only get high-level answers. So you already see a little bit of interest also from a vendor side. And then I think when you ask a vendor also to demo the solution to you, I feel as a customer, you also have an obligation to say, what exactly do you want to see? Because if I cannot tell you what you want to see, what can I show you? I mean, I don't want to spend 30 minutes to impress you with functionalities you don't need. I want to show you functionalities that really help your business, but you have to be able to communicate that. So I think, so on both sides, to be fair, it's like you have to do your homework and then you go through the process. And as a vendor, I also would expect you to prepare then accordingly, and you take the time. You cannot do a four-week preparation, obviously, to do a demo, but I would expect if I tell you exactly what I want, you can give me much better answers. So that's basically the process. That is unchanged for quite a while now. But as you can see, there's a lot of nuance and there,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Absolutely, Frank. And I think you simplified the process, but we all know how complicated the CPQ automation usually is.
Yeah.
But if we step back a little bit before kind of the process that you describe in terms of requirements, usually what are the 3 or 4 key challenges or outcomes that customers are looking for, which is kind of the North Star or the starting point, and from there on, they decide that, okay, it's time to invest into CPQ. And the reason I ask is there's a lot of parallels between product CPQ and services CPQ. So if would love to hear your thoughts in terms of what are the typical 4 challenges that you see from these hundreds of customers that you talk to when it comes to CPQ.
Sure. So when I look at the requirements, what you would see most often these days is CPQ is not new. You don't have very few green projects where you start from scratch and you can develop everything the way you want. So you have to integrate with something. So integration is a key. Integration is also a very difficult topic because lots of vendors will only tell you, we have APIs and you can integrate with it, which is nice, but doesn't tell me as a customer how much do I have to pay for that. So if you can integrate with that, is that 5 days, 2 days, 5 weeks, 5 months? I don't know. So I mean, you have to put a little bit more information around this. This is a super important topic for every customer. It doesn't matter. Product CPQ, service CPQ, you have to integrate with something. The second one I would say is to translate some of this business speak right now into CPQ requirements, because you see how solutions change names. So you go from product configurator to configure price quote to quote to cash to lead to cash to revenue management and so on. So now the question is then really who is doing what? And also when I hear things like, hey, I have a composable solution or I have a one solution. So I mean, you have to translate a little bit for customers who are not familiar with this and who don't want to become familiar with it to really say what makes the most sense for you. And then the third one is, I would say, really basic requirements. They have largely remained unchanged over many years now. So my products are still, or my services that I offer are not correct. It just doesn't work, right? So I need to, and even if I have them correct, it takes too long to implement them. So these are really, I would say, CPQ basics. It's nothing super exciting. It's nothing you read about in a magazine or read about in any of the large industry analyst reports. But that's the daily bread. That's the bread and butter of what you need to do, and that is still key for most customers. And then you have, as the fourth one, I would say. So now you have all the basics, but you also have lots of additional topics that are popping up.
Right.
It's billing, it's services,
Auto management.
it's subscriptions. And the question now is always, how much does that relate to CPQ? I mean, the services fits, from my point of view, really neatly in it because when I was with HP for 13 years, and there you would sell hardware, software, and services, right? So in this case, it's very clear services need to be there. It's not enough I sell you the hardware for your data center and the software to run it. I also need to install this at one point. How do I do that?
Right.
How does it work together? And I think that's also kind of a unique problem to services because very often these teams do not work hand in hand.
Right.
The team that's doing the product configuration is doing one thing, they need it at one point. And then you have another team who's looking at services.
Right.
They have nothing to do with the product CPQ, and they do it at another time. So I think that's a challenge that you would have to bring together, less maybe on the customer side,
Yeah.
more on the on the vendor side, where you would say, at the time you sell it, you also sell the services. How do you do that so that it fits nicely together?
And we see that all the time, Frank. I mean, you know the product CPQ or in general the quote to cash CPQ space so well. Like you said, you have been working at it since 96. But one of the things that we see all the time now is the unification of how you sell products and services. And there are a lot of tailwinds why the unification of how you sell products and services together is driving what we do at Provus, which is the services quoting, right? So let me spend 30 seconds just so that, for our audience in terms of what is services quoting or services CPQ and kind of get into what we see from our customers in terms of the challenges, right? Or the outcomes that they're looking for. Now, everyone understands the product CPQ, which is C and P and Q, which is the configuration, price, and quote. And examples like you were saying, if you are selling a software product or a hardware product, there are, you start with the C portion where if you are selling a hardware, you configure that hardware and say, okay, the hardware is going to be of this color and this location and this size and, all of whatever attributes that matters and impacts your pricing is the C part. And then obviously the P is the pricing based on how all of those attributes kind of combined, get together. And then that leads into the quoting. And of course, I'm just describing a very simple process. It's a very complicated affair when it comes to implementing it for large enterprises. But then, if you are selling hardware and if that hardware is tracked as an asset for many years to come, and if those assets have applicable and eligible services that you want to sell, which is where the services CPQ or services quoting comes in. This is just one of the industry segments, Frank, that we cater to, right? We call it asset-based services. We also cater to what we call the professional services, which is the software companies, but they have services, to enable their software. We cater to consulting services, pharmaceutical services, BPO services, and so on and so forth. But coming back to asset-based services, what we do, Frank, is now that you have sold the asset, now the services that you are eligible to sell could be implementation service, installation service, warranty service, guarantee service, and so on and so forth. But you have to be aware of the location of the hardware, how the hardware was configured, and how the hardware was priced for you to be able to sell all of these services. And unlike the product CPQ, anytime you are selling services, you have to worry about a timeline component because, unlike product, you are selling 100 units of something that doesn't have the timeline component to it. But services is always about, is it a 1-year services deal? Is it a multi-year services deal? And all of the resources who are going to play a role has to have a resource ramp down, the utilization factor? Is there going to be a productivity gain so that I initially spend a lot of time and then eventually it's going to taper down, right? All of that kind of stuff. But more importantly, on the other side of the axis of that the timeline is you have to understand the scope. Like you said, just because I'm selling a hardware in a certain way doesn't warranty that, oh, hardware is for 100K and hence services is 50K. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to understand which are the services, eligible services you are selling, what's a work breakdown structure, what resources you need to, kind of cater to those services, where are those resources going to come from, what is the resource mix? Because as we know, the services industry, all of that can't be, all of your senior resources. It has to be a leverage model for doing certain types of, tasks and stuff like that, which is where the services CPQ becomes really, really complex and why it's so different from product CPQ, right? And that's exactly what we do at Provis. But where we see a real challenge or real benefit, I would say, rather than challenge, Frank, which is similar to Provis, similar to product CPQ, is we see our customers getting benefit of what we call maximization of revenue, right? Unlike product CPQ in the services, like one of our customers sells 67 different types of services. Now, in that services, unless you are a really fantastic salesperson, you are going to include all applicable services. Otherwise, you are going to leave something. And this is one of the ways that we help customers maximize the revenue. But margin is everything in services. So we help customers optimize margins in a meaningful way, right? Which is humanly otherwise not possible for a multi-year complex deals. Cycle time reduction, right? I mean, we are able to bring the cycle time to literally minutes if you know what you are dealing with and put your baseline code together. And last but not least is the compliance, right? Your approvals. I mean, there's a notion of rogue discounting, rogue margins, all of that stuff in the services industry because you are dealing with Excel spreadsheets and nobody knows whether you did everything as per the organizational corporate guidance. And so we prevent all of that rogue discounting, rogue margins to go away from, right? And so those are the four categories that we usually see. Customers come to us and say, we have a lot of struggle in this two or more of these areas, and we really need help of implementing services quoting. So that's really why, we are seeing so much traction and it's transformational. And like you said, it goes hand in hand. If you are a company who is doing product and services together, it just goes hand in hand, Frank. No longer you can afford to automate your product CPQ and let somebody else worry about, services CPQ, right?
Yep. Yep. And I think, yeah, right now, with this whole idea of composability taking more of a hold, I think it's more doable than it was in the past because as you alluded to, right? So this is a complex topic. And you already have the product CPQ is also a complex topic because the sales cycle takes between 6 to 12 to 18 months. So now if I have this complex process extended because I add services on top, I make it even longer, even more dangerous. Can I close a deal? Can I not close a deal? Do I talk to the right people and so on? I think now you would have still a possibility as a customer to break this up a little bit, which suits more to how your internal process works. So you can do either services first or product first, and then you can dig a little bit deeper into it, but you still have more time. But I think that was not possible before because I've also seen efforts from CPQ vendors who were looking into this, but because of the reasons I mentioned, I think that was never seriously pursued because then it's like you have other software you can integrate with. Now, if I can fit this a little bit better together because of this whole composability idea, I think that makes it more doable these days.
Right, right. And Frank, you touched on a very interesting one, which is CPQ is not a standalone system. It interacts with, when we talk about lead to cash, quote to cash, procure to pay, no matter how you describe it, the CPQ is like an integral part of the overall process automation, and which is where the data that you talked about integration, and on the back of integration, there is this important element, which is the data collection that you are doing on back of automating these processes. And when you have automated these processes and collecting data, the next thing that comes to mind is, how is it that I can apply AI technologies on top of this data? Do you see that within your prospects? Do you hear that, like customers coming to you and saying, hey, I want to solve these 3 use cases. Can AI technologies help me?
So let's start this way. So in general, yes, you see lots of interest about AI. Now, interest in AI doesn't mean I can sell it, right? So, and what I would say is where you see, and I think I've had many meetings with different vendors, customers, about what's the best use case for this, right? So, and I would say, yes, you have use case for customers where you could use it, for example, as a chatbot. I can use it to cross and upsell. I can potentially even use it on the administrator side to set up simple rules, to find documentation and all this stuff. So I can use it um, also for extended CPQ, let's put it this way, and that is like where you have contract management, where you have lots of text and you would use a generative AI because that's what most people talk about then, right? I would say, yes, there's a use case. Now, I think honestly, from my point of view, the topic is a little bit overblown at this point. I love talking about it. So, but I'm a research analyst, and I talk to others about it. That's more future. It's not the right here and now what helps me the most. I would say it is absolutely something that's important. Is absolutely something that I would expect every CPQ vendor to do something in that area. But instead of waiting for one big change, what I see right now is more a trend of thousand little things who change, and they make a change. It doesn't is not a big headline when I talk about it, but when you work with the tool day to day, it makes an improvement. I expect that to continue. But I think right now, from a customer perspective, it's a little bit like science fiction. Oh yeah, it can do everything, right? So, but then it's like, hey, there are really basic problems which make a really big impact, and you're not looking at that. So let's just get our priorities straight. So we want to do that as well, but in order to do that, you have to have your data clean. You have to get potentially more data. You have to sort this. You haven't done that yet. So let's take it step by step. But the whole direction goes there. There's no question about it.
Great, great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, you just brought up something, call it full back to how you evaluate technology, where helping customers get to what matters, like what really is important first before you develop these requirements. So I imagine, say, in all the conversations you're having, the priority for a lot of folks is like AI number one, solve my margin problem two, right? Or like three. How do you so as somebody helping the evaluations happen, how do you right the ship a little bit? And how do you set those realistic expectations for somebody who says, hey, we got everything buttoned up, we're ready to go, we're ready to roll, AI, we want it now. Like, how do you set those expectations that like maybe you're not ready?
So for me, first of all, I don't want to tell customers in general what they should desire and what they should not desire. So for me, it starts with the business requirements and the process where I would say, hey, you probably have some key performance indicators which tell you what you want to achieve, because you're not doing that because you love CPQ so much or you like to make Provost a household name. You probably do that because you have a problem, right? So, and what exactly is that problem? What do you want to fix here? So you're delivering your projects too slow. You have customers who are unhappy with it. What you want to add more services? What are you trying to achieve? So I think as soon as that is clear, then you can talk about how do we get there. And then you could also add all these different topics to it, because there's a whole bunch of them. It's not just artificial intelligence. You could also have, like, for manufacturers, they want to have potentially their engineering team included, right? So they need the integration to a CAD solution like Autodesk or SolidWorks. So, and there's a whole bunch of these. So, and I think before you get lost here, it's always important to have your North Star. So what is it that you want to achieve? How do I get there? What's the easiest way I can get there? And that's what I do first. Sure, I don't want to forget these long-term goals. So right now I tell customers also, from my perspective, this is something that will come. You will use it more often. Very simple example would be to say, hey, if you're cross and upselling products, lots of customers still do that in an Excel file, right? So you maintain that manually. Hey, if that file gets really long and you have thousands of entries, you're not going to do that manually. You're losing your overview very quickly. So in this case, it would be helpful to have artificial intelligence potentially helping you with that, and then also sorting out what do I display, what do I not display.
Yeah.
But that's a step, that's the second or third step, right? So let's start with the first one. And that's why I think too many customers get too distracted right now with too many of these big items that you read about or hear about, or you see webinars or you read on LinkedIn. It's lots of distractions. But as a customer, you have potentially economically challenging times. So whatever I do, I need to have fast.
Right.
So if I start with the fanciest extension, it will cost me the most money and may not bring me the most, right? So focus what you want to do, and then we talk about, and that could be different for every customer. So it's not the same for every customer.
Very nice. All right. We are getting towards the end of our time here, but before we go, something we like to make sure we do for our audience is leave them with the takeaway, right? Leave them with something that is going to inspire them to take on their lead to cash problems, not push them down the road, and take it on with confidence. So, Frank, if you can inspire our audience to take some action on their lead to cash journeys, what would you say today?
Yeah, I try to be inspiring. If I am, I'm not sure, but I can at least try, right? So I would say, first of all, take a little breather, because I see lots of folks who want to just jump into it, want to see something, want to talk to a vendor, don't really know what I want or what I want to see. I just want to see if it looks modern and if I could work with it. So I would say take a step back. So it's important that you take a little bit of time before you get started for this whole pre-selection before you start the project. You don't need to take a ton of time. It should be the smallest percentage of your whole implementation, but you should take a little bit of time because you will work with the solution. You will work with it for quite some time. It will be integrated with a lot of stuff. So once implemented, it will be hard to replace. So you want to make sure that the solution you have has the capabilities you need. And also, since you're human, you have to make sure that you get along with the team that you're working with, because you may potentially spend a lot of time with them. And I think for most folks, I would say 4 to 6 weeks is a reasonable time to say, okay, do the steps that I mentioned earlier. Get someone involved who really knows CPQ, someone who is neutral, ideally. I don't want to work with a partner who is just selling one solution, because I can already tell you ahead of time what they will suggest. But work with someone who's neutral, who knows the area, and who can give you some guidance. You can still decide otherwise afterwards, right? So nobody forces you to take the advice you get and execute it. But I think that's what I see as the most important step. And don't invite vendors too early. I feel it's not helpful for the vendors and it's not helpful for the customers. As long as you're not really clear and have agreed upon with the decision makers what you want, I think it's unfair to ask someone to show you what you get, what you don't even know. It's like you have to be able to tell that to me, and then I can show it. You can tell me afterwards as a vendor, I didn't like the presentation. I don't think you can solve my problems, but you have to be able to clearly communicate it. And I think you have to take the time to get there. And as I said, 4 to 6 weeks, I think, is for most folks a reasonable time. By the way, I have some customers also in German-speaking Europe. They take 6 to 12 months to do that, right? So just to give you some ideas, so it could also be different, but I would say for most businesses, take a little bit of time, a little bit of money to support this, to make sure you have the right solution, because it will be key and you will be pretty dependent on it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And that's great advice, not just for CPQ evaluations, but any technology evaluation as well. Right? Like really understand what you're trying to solve. You can communicate it. I like that. Communicate it to the people you think might be solving it for you, the vendors, and be clear. And you know, at the end of the day, it's a partnership, right? Any kind of technology acquisition needs to be a partnership. So feel good about it. Great. Mahesh, any takeaways for the audience from this wonderful CPQ episode?
Yeah, I mean, Frank is an expert and he covered it well. I'll just kind of build on top of what Frank said, which is especially when it comes to services CPQ, where we see 95% of the customers using Excel spreadsheets. Going back to what Frank was saying, I think take some time and really understand what are the challenges, right? What is it that you are not able to do, or what is it that you want to do differently when you move away from Excel spreadsheets and automate your processes? I think that's important to understand, going back to what Frank was saying. Like, don't do it just because somebody else is doing it. Don't do it just because you're reading more and more about it on LinkedIn. Just be clear about what your objectives are. I think the second very critical is, these are transformative processes. In other words, it's not the problem you are looking at is not a standalone problem. It does connect, to your front office, to your back office, and it's a part of the entire transaction end to end, which also means that you have to look at it not just a problem for today. You have to look at it from a problem of, scale, and where you are going to be 5 years from now, and how is all of these processes that you're automating is going to scale, right? And third is really, data is important, and thinking about how all of this data for the entire lead to cash is going to come together as an afterthought doesn't work anymore, because then you are going to end up with a very, very suboptimal solutions, doing a lot of workarounds, a lot of patchy stuff, right? So you have to really think about how the data is going to work all the way end to end, from lead to opportunity to quoting to order management to invoicing, billing, rev rec, back-end fulfillment systems. You have to really connect the dots across the board and see and make sure that you are not replicating the data, you are not recreating the data, you are not kind of duplicating the data. Right? There's a lot of that data strategy that has to go in, without which you are not going to create a system that is going to last for too long, and you will end up spending money again.
Yeah, beautiful. All right. So that just about wraps us up. Frank, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, Novus CPQ Consulting, just learn more about what you have to say, where should we look for you?
Yeah, so check out the CPQ podcast maybe. There are over 300 episodes, as you mentioned earlier, right? So with all kinds of thought leaders here for the last 7 years. Listen to this. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, frank.sohn@novuscpq.com, or just go to LinkedIn, type in Frank Sohn, you will find me.
Beautiful. Well, Frank, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been a fantastic guest. And thank you once again to our audience for joining us, for joining the Services Ops Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. And also don't forget to go be courageous and be a courageous services leader.